Okay, great. We'll get started here. Thanks everyone for attending today. Session on My Employee Wants a Raise, how to effectively respond to these requests. Just wanted to start, I guess, by introducing myself, Chris Broughton with Upsourced HR, Bachelor of Management, Chartered Professional in Human Resources, a Senior Professional in Human Resources, and a Senior Certified Professional. Basically, I've been in HR for a number of years, and I've dealt with many of these conversations over the years, and I just wanted to share some advice and some tips on how to respond to these type of conversations in the workplace. Throughout this session, please, if you have any questions, by all means, use the tools that are provided there. There are some different questions and answers that you can ask throughout the webinar. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go along, and I'll try to answer them as we go through or at the very end. So again, my employee wants a raise. This is an important topic that comes up quite often when discussing compensation for employees. And this is something that managers and supervisors and business owners need to be prepared for. So that's where we want to make sure that we are prepared for these conversations and know how to respond to them effectively. So we'll give you a scenario here. An employee comes to you and asks you if you have a moment. This is something that happens quite often. And of course, as the manager, you say, yes, come on in, sit down. What do you have on your mind? And they begin to ask you about their wages. They tell you how hard they've been working, and they tell you that they feel they're not being compensated fairly. They don't feel they're necessarily being treated fairly, and that they've heard from another employer they've heard other employers paying more, and therefore they feel that they should be compensated the same as well. The first thing to do in that situation there is to basically pause the conversation. Indicate and acknowledge the employee and thank them for bringing this to your attention. Likely this wasn't easy. I know when I've personally had to make these conversations and have these conversations in the workplace, it can be quite difficult to have those and bring these topics up. So again, acknowledge the request and thank them for bringing this to your attention. A lot of employees won't necessarily do that, so it's good to recognize an employee who feels comfortable in bringing this to your attention. The next is to indicate that you want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information. This isn't something that you can just begin to have a conversation with right at that moment. So you want to make sure that you come prepared for the conversation and that you can gather this information so that you can discuss this at a different date. So what the next would be is offer to set up a meeting within a week to discuss their request. So set a date and time at that point. That's very important that it acknowledges their request and that you're taking it seriously by setting a date and time to review with them. This holds you accountable and them accountable to make sure that this continues. The conversation doesn't stop there. Next, ask the employee to do some research and come prepared to the meeting with their information regarding their request. This is very important because it puts the onus on the employee as well as yourself. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but it puts the onus on the employee as well to come prepared with some information to back up their request. The worst thing I've encountered is when an employee comes to me regarding a wage increase request and they have nothing really to back up their information. And we'll get into a little bit on the factors of what goes into wages for employees. But this is one of the biggest things I find is that employees don't necessarily come prepared. So this gives them an opportunity to get their information and get prepared for their meeting as well. So on your end, how to prepare for this? First one is make this a priority. So this employee has taken the time to come to you with their concern. You should do them the favor and make this a priority for yourself. Either collect your information yourself or contact someone like myself, and I can help you prepare this information for you so that you can come prepared to your meeting at that later date. So we'll collect the salary and wage information for comparable positions in the market. This is going to be very important for you to be able to back up to make sure that the employee is being compensated fairly in the marketplace that you're operating in. You want to make sure that you compare this with the individual's current compensation and compare this with your organization's overall compensation strategy. So some organizations have different compensation strategies. Some want to make sure that they are acquiring top talent, and therefore they want to be in the 90th percentile for wages in the market. And so if somebody is coming in with an employer that's paying more than that, they'll want to make sure either they match or meet that in order to make sure they can maintain that competitiveness. Others would prefer just to be in that 50th percentile. They're right in the middle range. And so they're kind of in that area there. So again, you have to compare this with your organization's overall compensation strategy. Determine if the request is valid and whether an increase is feasible. So this is going to be one of the hardest parts. Is again, you have to compare this against the market data that you've been collected, as well as your organization. Determine if it's valid, and whether or not it's feasible. So whether or not you can afford a wage increase or not. And so again, that's going to have to come back to your budgeting needs and your own organization's point at where you are right now. Next is consider options for the employee to earn additional income if certain objectives or goals are met. So this would be kind of more of those performance-based goals. So again, this will be very important for you to maybe consider some options that if an employee reaches certain milestones or let's say sales objectives, then they are compensated. This provides an incentive for the employee as well as a bonus for the organization based on likely increased performance or increased productivity. And then also consider alternatives to monetary compensation, and we'll go into some of those different alternatives as well. So that's how, but just consider, I guess, those different alternatives to strictly the monetary compensation. And next would be to ensure that the individual is being compensated fairly, and by that I don't necessarily mean equally with the other employees. Make sure that they are being compensated for their skill sets that they're bringing to the organization. And make sure that they are being compensated for that. So what factors determine the salaries? Position, so this includes things like their skills, education, abilities, training. It's safe to say that a janitor or custodian is not going to be paid the same as a doctor. And this goes a lot into the different availability of training, as well as the amount of, or just I guess the limited pool of people that can perform those tasks. So that's one big thing. The next is supply and demand. And again, talking about the pool of people, people who are coming straight out of high school with limited knowledge or experience in education will be much easier to attract to positions such as, in your fast food type position. Whereas, like I talked about the doctors earlier, much smaller pool of what you're able to do. It also factors into your location as well. So again, if your organization is operating in an area where there's a limited pool of candidates, you might be competing for that candidate, and therefore your supply is minimal, but the demand is high, and that is going to have an increase in increased pressure on wages in that area. I mentioned earlier about your organization's compensation strategy. So again, make sure that's factored into how the people are compensated in your organization. And then also performance and objectives. So again, if there is some sort of performance-based pay within the position itself, then again, that's factored into the overall compensation package. So the conversation with the employee, again, thank the employee for bringing this up. Make sure to communicate the employee's value to the organization if warranted. So again, if the employee is not not performing the way they should, and they're sitting here asking for a wage increase, make sure that to communicate that to them. Ask the employee to present their information and review their findings. So again, this is the opportunity for the employee to present their case as to why they deserve a wage increase. Be willing to listen to their facts and data. So again, you have your information, but be willing to listen to what information that's being provided by that employee. And then present your information and discuss the options. So this should be a back and forth conversation with the employee and help them understand your standpoint and understand their viewpoint as well. So some of the alternatives that you can consider, if the compensation increase is warranted but not feasible, consider the alternatives. This could be things like a performance bonus, flex time, or telecommuting. A lot of employees value that more so than a wage increase if it's an option. There's increased vacation time. So if an employee is on vacation, is on a salary, let's say their salary is $50,000 a year. If you were to offer increased vacation time from, let's say, 2 weeks to 3 weeks vacation time, at the end of the day, there is really no increase in cost for the organization other than the employee's time away from the organization, away from the business. And we can go into a whole other conversation on how that actually can improve performance, but that's a conversation for another day. There's also the option for professional development as well. So looking at options for the employee to consider developing their own skill sets and increase their employability. So that's an option to consider as well as an alternative. So no increase if a wage increase is not warranted or deserved. In this case, you just not warranted. The employee is not performing well, or there are other issues. First thing is be honest with them. Tell them why that is, why they are doing or why the decision has been made. Explain the reasons behind the decision. So don't hide that fact that they're not getting the wage increase, and don't hide it, and be honest with them that it's related to their job performance, and make sure that's communicated with them. Offer to coach the employee to improve their performance. So again, that's something that you can do to hopefully improve that relationship with the employee and make sure that it turns from a possible negative situation by saying that there's no wage increase available, and turning it into a positive by offering to help the employee and assist the employee to improve their performance, which is something you should likely be doing anyways with the employee, but this is a good opportunity to address it yet again. So just a couple things to avoid. Avoid allowing the employee to compare others in the organization. This is specifically about them and their compensation and their strategy, as far as their role within the company. So don't allow them to bring in, the person sitting next to them is getting paid more. Make sure that the focus is going to be placed on the employee and their performance. And there is a caveat to that I'll bring up in just a minute here. Make sure you want to avoid using different criteria. We want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples when you can. So again, we want to make sure that we're comparing the different variables, especially in the marketplaces that you're operating in. Let's say, for example, you have you're looking at a welder, for example. You want to make sure that you're getting the most information for that welder as possible. So you don't necessarily want to be comparing welders' wages in a manufacturing facility versus welding wages in a oil and gas operation. There are two completely different marketplaces, and there are completely different variables in there. So again, make sure that you're getting as much focused data as possible. And then biases, including gender pay gaps. So again, this is where the employee may be able to compare another person in the organization if there is that. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you avoid anything like the gender pay gap. So again, advocating for equal pay for equal work. Again, making sure that everything else being equal, education, responsibilities, everything, that they are being paid appropriately and compensated equally for individuals in those different positions. So just avoid those few little items there. So that kind of hopefully provides you with a little bit of confidence in how to approach these conversations. Again, just to recap, is don't necessarily respond to these requests initially. Make sure to hit the pause button, acknowledge the request, and collect the information. That way you can come prepared to these meetings, because that's going to be very important. So that's going to be the biggest thing, is collecting that information and having that conversation with the employee. So if there are any questions, I'll take them. Are there any tools out there to find out what other people pay? Good question. Yes, there are some tools out there. There's a couple different websites that you can utilize. There is the Alberta, the A-List site, which I can provide to individuals. I'll load a copy of that to the presentation as well. And but there is a couple different websites that people can do. They can also contact myself. And I have access to some proprietary software that allows me to gather that information on a very focused basis. I'll continue to answer some questions if they're coming in here as well, but I just want to again make a plug for our HR On Demand services. This is a service offering for businesses and organizations that would like the HR support. And basically what it is, it's a service that individuals can log in, have access to a lot of different training tools, assessments, as well as a video library, monthly HR documents, employee surveys, as well as HR consulting time with myself, and provide you with some of the answers, some of the questions that may be coming up. If you're interested in a service like this, please give me a call or contact me directly at chris@upsourcedhr.com. And certainly I can come in and have a conversation with you about this and determine what your needs might be and make sure we can fit the product that's going to work for you. So again, I'll stick around for a few minutes here, but just wanted to thank you for everyone for participating, and I look forward to seeing you at our next session. Thank you.